for the
Yes,
safety
sir. Good
contact.
morning.
Hi. Okay. All right. What? All set? I'll take that as a yes. Good morning, everyone. This is a meeting of the Elections Committee of the Board of Wmata. Today is June 11th, 2020. Before conducting the business of the Elections Committee, I'd like to recognize Teresa Impastato for today's safety contact. Teresa?
Good morning. Thank you, sir. June is observed every year as National Safety Month by the National Safety Council. National Safety Month focuses on saving lives and preventing injuries from the workplace to any place. The National Safety Council has highlighted a series of resources this year on mental health. Experts recognize that on a global scale, the pandemic is impacting our communities, not only through illness. The impact of COVID-19 knows no boundaries, and all of our lives are affected in many ways. These impacts create stress and anxiety, which can have serious negative effects on your mental health. Here are a few tips to increase wellness during this difficult time. Move. Take 5 to 10 minute breaks each hour and commit to moving. Try performing a series of dynamic stretches to release tension. Exercise has shown to dramatically improve health and well-being. Avoid excessive consumption of the news and social media. Take a break. Maintain your commitment to a healthy diet and avoid junk food. Maintain a regular sleep schedule. Understanding that much has changed over the past few months in our lives, maintaining a regular schedule can be especially difficult. Establishing boundaries and prioritizing sleep is critically important to both your physical and mental health and well-being. For more information on National Safety Month, go to www.nsc.org. For more information about mental health resources during the COVID-19 pandemic, go to www.nih.nih.gov. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We'll now turn to approval of agenda and minutes. In order to help today's meeting run smoothly, I'm going to ask Ms. Ellison, Board Corporate Secretary, to call the roll for identified board members and Metro staff present at this meeting. Jennifer?
Great, thank you. Chair Horner?
Here.
Director Letourneau?
Present.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Present.
Director Slater?
On mute, perhaps?
I think he might be. Director Smedberg?
Present.
Gotcha. That was Director Slater, so now Director Smedberg?
Present.
Director Gideby?
Present.
Director Goldman?
Present.
Director McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum for the Elections Committee, and I'll also note the staff present on today's call includes General Manager and CEO Paul Wiedefeld, Deputy Board Secretary John Pasick, the following Executive Vice Presidents: Chief Safety Officer Teresa Impastato, General Counsel Patty Lee, External Relations Barbara Richardson, Capital Program Delivery Laura Mason, Strategy Planning and Program Management Tom Webster, Chief Operating Officer Joe Leader, Chief Financial Officer Dennis Anasike, and Senior Vice President of Customer Service, Communications and Marketing Lynn Bowersox. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll now turn to approval of the agenda for this meeting of the Elections Committee. Does anyone have any suggested changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll say that if there are no objections, I'll consider the agenda accepted as presented. Thank you. We'll now turn to approval of the minutes, specifically the June 27th, 2019 Election Committee minutes and the minutes of the meeting of the May 11th, 2020 Election Committee executive session. Can I get a motion from a committee member to approve the minutes from our last public meeting in June 2019 and the minutes of our May 11th executive session? Would anyone like to?
Motion. This is Greg Slater, a motion.
Thank you. Could I get a second from a committee member?
This is Jeff Meridian. I'll second.
Thank you. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 I need to abstain, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any opposed? Thank you. The minutes are approved. We have only one item on our agenda today, namely to nominate board officers for the coming year. The board has aligned officers' terms with Metro's fiscal year, which runs from July 1 until July 30th. So officers who are nominated at this committee's meeting and elected at today's board meeting will begin their terms at the end of today's board meeting. I move the following individuals to serve as the board's officers for fiscal year 2021, specifically as chair, Paul Smedberg; as first vice chair, Stephanie Gideby; as second vice chair, Michael Goldman. Could I get a second from a committee member?
Second, this is Letourneau.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll say thank you. I'll ask Ms. Ellison to conduct a roll call vote.
Chair Horner,
Aye.
Director Letourneau,
Aye.
Director Slater,
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. With no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. The Finance and Capital Committee meeting will begin shortly. Thank you.
Jennifer, we're ready to proceed to finance.
You are, sir. Thank you.
All right, this is Chair Steve McMillan. Good morning and welcome to the Finance and Capital Committee's June 11th meeting. Trust everyone's had a chance to review today's agenda. If there are no objections to the agenda, we'll consider it approved as presented. Any objections? Okay, the agenda is approved. We have the minutes from our previous meeting before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have one informational item on today's agenda. Today, Ms. Mason will be providing the committee with an update on the platform improvement project, both reviewing the progress to date and reviewing how the plans for completion of the project have evolved and what those impacts will be going forward. The floor is yours, Ms. Mason.
Good morning, members of the Finance and Capital Committee. It's my pleasure today to give you an update on the Platform Improvement Program. Next slide. As background, this program was first presented to the board in May of 2018, and our first outage was last summer with the closure of all stations south of National Airport. In total, this program involves addressing 20 outdoor stations that require immediate attention, as the platform edges are currently supported by temporary measures to stabilize them and ensure the safety of our passengers. There are 12 such stations in Virginia and 8 in Maryland. And the repairs included in the station platform reconstruction project include the removal and replacement of at least 50% of the cantilevered structural edge of the platform, as well as replacing the platform tile, the ADA tactile strip, and the granite edges. State of the platforms is quite dire. These are the photos that were taken of some of the worst stations that were in south of National within phase 1 to show you what it looked like before we began this work. In addition to addressing these state of good repair issues, the program also has additional benefits. On the next slide. Thank you. Improving rider and passenger safety. Particularly at the platform edge, correcting the gap between the platform edge and the train to enable level boarding. While the stations are closed to do this incredibly invasive platform reconstruction work, we are also incorporating customer experience enhancements into the platform improvement program. These enhancements include a new tile on the platforms and mezzanine that has a non-slip surface, particularly when wet, new passenger information display signs, PIDs, that have better visibility, and increased illumination of the station, improving lighting, particularly at nighttime. Moving into what we have completed to date. To date, we have completed phase 1 of the project, and that is the 6 stations south of Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, which were completed primarily during last summer's shutdown and includes punch list items through the fall. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the before and after pictures showing the extensive temporary shoring that was in place at King Street and Braddock Road, and how we have been able to remove that now that we have completed this work. Next slide. Phase 2 is in progress now. These are the 4 Orange Line stations west of Ballston, so East Falls Church, West Falls Church, Dunloring, and Vienna. The shutdown for phase 2 started on Memorial Day weekend, Saturday, May 23rd. And to date, we are making very good progress within this project and are on schedule to reopen by Labor Day weekend. Looking ahead at the balance of the program, the good news is that we are halfway through, or at least by the end of September, we will be halfway through this program with 10 stations completed. That still leaves 10 remaining that need to be addressed. There are 4 stations on the Upper Green Line: West Hyattsville, Prince George's Plaza, College Park, and Greenbelt. 3 on the Eastern Orange Line: Cheverly, Landover, and New Carrollton. And 3 on the Blue Line: Arlington Cemetery, National Airport, and Addison Road. Additionally, when looking at how we will actually execute these stations and the shutdowns that they require, we've identified several other scope items that should be executed in addition to the platform reconstruction. And that is the modernization of Deanwood and Minnesota Avenue stations. We have learned that in order to close Cheverly, we will not be able to serve Deanwood and Minnesota. So we propose including the modernization of those stations in the shutdown necessary to execute the work at Cheverly, Landover, and New Carrollton. In addition, within that outage, we also plan to replace the deck of the aerial structure just outside of Cheverly Station. In Arlington Cemetery, when we close that station, we also intend to address drainage issues and install a new grade crossing. This is not for public use, but this is a maintenance item for us that we can allow high rail trucks to board our system at Arlington Cemetery. We've been analyzing lessons learned from Platform 1 and 2 to reevaluate how to best complete this program, particularly how to reduce impact on riders through ensuring that we can provide sufficient travel alternatives. We've also been looking at how to increase competition for these procurements to ensure we get best value. And finally, we've been looking at how to accelerate the most disruptive capital work into 2021 while ridership is lower due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With those priorities in mind, I would now like to share with you our tentative plan for the completion of this work that we are still soliciting feedback from and coordinating with the jurisdictions. Next slide. We propose the next phase, Platform 3, address the blue and green lines. We are proposing a spring 2021, so mid-February to mid-May event, where we would close Arlington Cemetery Station and Addison Road Station. It would be a 3-month shutdown at Arlington Cemetery, as that is a side load platform, meaning the tracks are in the center, and it is not safe for us to do this work on the platform edge with trains single tracking through that station. At Addison Road, that is a center load platform, so we are able to shut down the station and do a single track around it, single track bypass like we planned at East Falls Church pre-COVID. What this means for service is that there would be no blue line service, but we would have yellow line trains running from Franconia Springfield, and silver line service would be able to maintain near normal headways. That would be mid-February to mid-May. At the conclusion of that event on or before Memorial Day weekend, we would then switch to a West Hyattsville to Greenbelt shutdown and address the 4 stations on the Northern Green Line between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So all of the Platform 3 work would be done in calendar year 2021. And that takes us to phase 4. Next slide. In Platform 4, we are proposing we complete the work on the Eastern Orange Line in the summer period from Memorial Day to Labor Day, closing all stations outbound from Minnesota Avenue. As I mentioned previously, we have the platform structural repair work to do at Chevrolet Landover New Carrollton. And we propose also including the station modernization work necessary at Deanwood and Minnesota Avenue. In order to support this, we would likely send the orange line to Largo or Silver and turn one of those two lines either at Eastern Market or at the junction where they split just outbound of Stadium Armory. In addition, within the Platform 4 contract, we would include the work at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Right now, this is tentatively slated for fall of 2022 to spring of 2023. It is not a closure of this station. We will always maintain two service tracks, but we would have partial station closures, meaning a mezzanine would be closed or changing where passengers are routed through that station over approximately a 5-month period. We are looking to accelerate this work, but the timing is dependent upon the completion of Project Journey, which is currently consuming all the laydown space available at the airport. With Platform 4, it is important to note that the work to replace the Chevrolet aerial structure deck does require extensive coordination with CSX as it crosses their tracks. Therefore, we intend to issue the RFP and award this contract late this year in fall 2020 to allow adequate time for coordination for a summer of 2022 outage. Next slide, please. In summary, by the end of this September, the platform improvement program will be 50% complete with 10 out of 20 stations completed. And our intention is to complete the remaining stations within the next 2 years through 2 design build contracts, with both of them awarded by the end of this calendar year. Again, Platform 3 would cover the work on the blue and green lines, with construction taking place in the spring and summer of 2021. And Platform 4, the Eastern Orange Line plus Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, would take place in 2022. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Mason. Just quick things, and this would probably be more highlighting things already in the presentation. If you could just give an example or two of, relative to the original vision of this multi-year project, how either the substance or sequencing has changed based on either lessons learned from the blue-yellow line phase last summer, from the opportunities to perhaps accelerate some work due to temporarily reduced customer demand, and then from conversations from various stakeholders who've perhaps given us better ideas of how to proceed.
Sure. A couple of different items. So originally when we proposed this program in 2018, it was work that would be done continuously over a 3-year period with station closures in fall, winter, and spring, in addition to the summer period. After extensive coordination with the jurisdictions, we modified the program to be a primarily summertime program with the work executed between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Well, in addition, what we found is last year when we were bidding Platform 2, we found we had challenges with the size of that contract and with a lot of the adjacent work that was happening, particularly on the upper green line. What we've done instead is focus on the outages being one at a time. We have found from a ridership perspective that we cannot support having multiple outages. So the Arlington Cemetery outage at one point was planned to be concurrent with the Eastern Orange Line work, and that would significantly degrade ridership, as most of our alternatives are to move people between the orange and blue lines, which means we cannot do that work at the same time. So we've looked at modifying the program from being continuous to being summers only, and now proposing a spring event for the 2 stations that actually have lower ridership in the spring than they do in the summer. So that is one change we've made. Looking at the acceleration, that is another opportunity. We looked at what work was ready to be pulled forward into this year, and we saw the opportunity at Arlington and at Addison that we could get them ready for this spring. One of the other lessons we've learned from Platform 2 is the ability for Wmata to directly purchase and provide to the selected contractor some of the long lead items. This includes the granite edge, along with some other components that enable us to do work as early as this spring.
Okay, thank you for all that. And I'll just briefly, I think, speak on behalf of many of my colleagues that the initial shock we had when this proposal was first brought before us, I think has experience has shown that the decisive path forward to take care of this long-standing problem very aggressively was a wise decision, and the way you've approached execution with flexibility to maximize opportunities, minimize disruption has been laudable. So thank you for that. I'll move on to other members for comments and questions. Mr. Meridian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any comments or questions at this time.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
Just thank you for the presentation. No questions or comments at this time.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg.
No questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Horner.
Sorry, I have no questions either.
Thanks. Ms. Gideby.
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. One is broad and one is narrowly focused. The broad question is that the red line is conspicuously omitted in this platform improvement project presentation. All the work is on yellow, green, orange, and blue lines. So my first question, Ms. Mason, is there a phase to do work on the red line after completing work in the post-2022 period, or is the construction of such high quality on the red line platforms that there's no need to do any work along the red line stations in the near future? The second question is more precise, and it's that the county, Montgomery County, has brought to my attention a concern about the Rockville station, where they point out that the canopy is in bad shape and in need of replacement. And so the specific question is, what are the plans for addressing those concerns about the canopy and any other needs for improvements at the Rockville station specifically?
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. I'll address the first question about red line stations more broadly. So some of the red line stations that needed this work were attempted actually initially, and if I can recall back to our May 2018 presentation, we did discuss how this work, this platform edge reconstruction, had been attempted at Shady Grove as well as at some other stations, resulting in it taking about 3 years per station. So the red line actually had some of the earliest stations addressed, and it was those lessons learned that led us to this new approach of doing extensive station closures. We've also completed a significant amount of the work at Rhode Island Station, also on the red line, and that was completed in the summer of 2018. There is still some platform improvement work, the replacement of the cantilevered edge to do at a couple of the red line stations. We are still evaluating how to best do that work. It is not as extensive as the 20 stations proposed here, and it is work we are trying to find ways to do between weekends and the overnight window to avoid having to do such an extensive disruption. We are also mindful that there are other projects on the red line, including our tunnel ventilation project, that will trigger some outages, and so we are looking to combine the platform work with that other work expected in 2022 and beyond. With respect to the canopies, we are aware of the structural issues at the canopy at Rockville as well as some of the other red line stations. We have designed the solutions, and we are working with our construction team to determine the best way forward to complete that work. Currently, it is slated for 2022 and 2023.
Thank you. I appreciate if you could try to accelerate that work around the Rockville station, because the Rockville station is also in the midst of a county and city project to improve the pedestrian bridge that connects the station with the government center, county government center in Rockville. And so there's a need to coordinate the local projects with the Wmata project in terms of actual entry into the station. So whatever could be done to move those projects along and get the coordination done on that during this period would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
I will look at that.
All right. Next, Mr. Letourneau.
Thanks. Can we go back to the phase two discussion for a minute? So I just want to sort of reiterate that we are anticipating a Labor Day completion of the work. And can you give us any more detail on exactly how sort of the social distancing components to this is working on the project, and whether there are any supply chain issues that the contractor is experiencing?
Sure. So with respect to Platform 2, the contractor has been working extensively to address COVID-19 and the CDC impacts, and that will actually be part of our recovery plan update here in the next board meeting. But ahead of that, what I can share is that they've been able to sustain progress while protecting their workforce. They've had a very low case rate and to date no hospitalizations due to COVID-19. They have done, I think, a tremendous job with producing masks and other materials to protect their workforce, as well as changing their approach. They do have dedicated teams at each station, and they were able to take advantage of our change in rail hours, closing at 9 p.m. prior to the shutdown, to accelerate a lot of the work. This is also the same contractor that successfully completed Platform 1, and so they themselves took a lot of lessons from last year in terms of how to approach the work, and have gotten off to a much faster start this year. So despite the need for social distancing, they are actually ahead of where they were at the same point last year. So at this time, we see everything is on track for Labor Day weekend reopening, and we continue to monitor that closely.
And there have been no interruptions on materials, which I know was a concern at one point.
Thank you. There are some supply chain challenges, particularly relative to the electronic displays for our PIDs. We are working through with the suppliers, looking for opportunities to accelerate them in order to complete that work within the outage, paying for accelerated shipment air freight. That is within the contractor to address those. We do not see anything that would prevent us from reopening the station, although there may be some work that has to continue past the end, but the stations would be able to reopen on time.
And then I know this is a little tangential, but since we're talking about the shutdown of these, one of the other sort of co-benefits was the ability to proceed on the Silver Line Phase 2 tie-in with Phase 1. Do you have any information about that project and sort of a timeline on that?
We are working very closely with Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority, MWA, and their contractor, Capital Rail Constructors, CRC, to address how to do the work at Wheelie Avenue Station, to tie in the train control systems between Phase 1 and Phase 2. At this time, they intend to start that work on June 19th. Both organizations have made that commitment to do the tie-in work, and we see that as on track to complete in time to reopen all of this area by Labor Day weekend.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. So with no other questions or comments, that will close discussion of this item. Thank you, Ms. Mason. And with no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. The board meeting will begin in just a few moments, so everyone please stand by.
Will this line be used for the board meeting?
John, testing the audio.
We can hear you, Lynn.
Jennifer, it's David Warner. Will this line be used for the board meeting shortly? Hello?
We'll
Dave,
begin
I think so.
momentarily. We'll begin momentarily.
Jennifer?
Yes, sir. We are beginning when you're ready. Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the Wmata board meeting of June 11th, 2020. I'd like to ask the board corporate secretary, Ms. Ellison, to join the roll or to call the roll, and then let us know who is from staff is also on the with us today on the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Smedberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Here.
Director Horner?
Here.
Director Letourneau?
Present.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Present.
Director Slater?
Present.
Director McMillan?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum. And today's staff attendees remain the same as they were for the last two meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now we have an agenda before us. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as presented. Now we'll have approval of the minutes. We have three sets of minutes for approval: the May 28th, 2020 board meeting, the May 28th, 2020 executive session, and the June 4th, 2020 executive session. I'd like to move these minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Gibity. Are there any comments or questions on any of those sets of minutes? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Any abstentions? Thank you. The ayes have it. Next, we'll move on to public comment. We have one public comment in from Star Child of Virginia, Dragon VA. And the email or the statement reads as follows: the hypocrisy of this statement, and that is in reference to the board statement, especially the last sentence, is disgusting and disappointing. With less than a year, when less than a year ago, Wmata's own police department demonstrated the same racial discrimination and violence, and there's a link to a audio feed from one of the local news stations. This board, nor any representative from Wmata, not the GM, CEO Wiedefeld, or Chief Pavlik, has done absolutely nothing to communicate condemnation of MTPD brutality or corrective actions to eradicate systematic racism in MTPD. Before you weigh in and condemn what others are doing, how about giving your employees, constituents, and customers a condemnation of MTPD brutality and an update on what has been done to actually demonstrate that Black Lives Matter instead of lip service and obfuscation, that you stand for unity and equality simply because Black and brown people are allowed to ride your vehicles. Please clean up your own house. This concludes the public comment section. Next, we'll have the reports from the advisory committees. Now we have a report which is available online from the or a copy of the Accessibility Advisory Committee's June report. The Rider Advisory Council met last night, so its report will be available later this month. Next on the agenda is the COVID-19 update. Mr. General Manager, would you like to set this up for us? And Ms. Emposado, you're with us as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa. As you know, this thing continues to change around us, both in terms of some of the openings that we're addressing, and then also what's happening to our workforce. So we want to give you a sense of that, and we'll do that obviously more in the recovery plan update. But I think from a pure COVID-19 aspect, I think it's very important to remember that we're still in the throes of this, that we're not clear yet, and we're very concerned and will remain concerned for the safety of our employees and our customers first and foremost. So with that, Teresa, if you could.
Thank you, sir. Throughout Metro's 12,300 employee workforce, there are 157 confirmed cases of COVID-19. 110 of these employees have returned to work, and one remains hospitalized at this time. We will also detail some additional data with regard to COVID-19 case rates in the recovery plan update. The Pandemic Task Force continues to meet twice per week, and we are continuing to implement and continuously assess the efficacy of the mitigations that have been detailed in prior briefings, which include an aggressive cleaning and disinfection regimen, as well as numerous workplace safety mitigations in accordance with modified work practices and alternative scheduling.
Teresa, this is Teresa. Teresa, this is Jennifer. We can just pause for one moment. We're having an issue with the slide, technical issue with the slide. So if you can just give me one moment, I just need to pause for a second while we pull up your slides for you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we move on to the next agenda item while we continue to work with our slide issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we'll move on to, so just for everyone with us here today, we are having a technical difficulty with a set of slides, the COVID-19 recovery update, which is an important one, obviously, and want to give that update, the attention it deserves. So we're going to move on now to the report by the chair. Earlier this week, the board issued a statement regarding the killing of George Floyd and the racial injustice and inequities that are still pervasive in our communities. We collectively condemn systematic racism within and throughout our transit system. Further, we acknowledge the historic role of transportation in the civil rights struggle in the United States. Metro has a long-standing pledge to diversity, transit equity, and inclusion, and we will keep that commitment at the forefront of all we do. For over 40 years, Metro has been a unifier for our region. Every day, we bring people together from all walks of life, different races, different ethnicities, different economic standings, different abilities, different political beliefs, different religions, and many, many more differences that make our region uniquely special. Mobility Metro provides ensures access to jobs, health, education, worship, education, and much more. Keep access, equal opportunity, and Metro will continue to deliver on that promise. Therefore, the Metro Board and leadership team reaffirms Metro's mission to provide safe, equitable, reliable, and cost-effective public transportation in connecting communities, improving mobility, and stimulating economic development. To that end, the Wmata Board will come back in July, if not sooner, with an action plan to address inequitable policies and practices that do not advance our mission. We will be transparent and publicly accountable for these efforts as we continue to look for ways to elevate the conversation around these critical issues. We strive to not only follow best practice, but to also serve as an example and leader for others. This concludes my report, but before I turn it over to the general manager for his report, I'd like to give board members an opportunity to speak on this issue if they choose to do so. Would anyone like to make any comments or remarks before we move on?
Mr. Chair, I just would like to thank you, your leadership and those of the board. I think at this time, it is critical that we hold ourselves accountable to greater culture change and systems change. I also am really excited for the thought process of really thinking about greater inclusion and focusing on the rider experience. As a rider, Metro rail and bus who happens to be a woman of color, I know what it means to stand on the platform and the hesitancy of watching Metropolitan Transit Police Department members. I also recognize what it means to have to come to work every single day, even through this COVID experience, for both our employees and riders who are dependent on Metro bus and rail. This is really an opportunity to support the full staff and what they have been going through. This is a very difficult time, both as we deal with the pandemic and also our history as a nation. I thank you for the leadership that you've shown and those of the board to really think about the ways in which we continue to hold ourselves accountable. I also want to just thank Chief Pavlik, who has continued to look for ways to hold himself and many of his staff accountable in the same ways. We recognize that we won't always get it right, but I appreciate us really taking the chance to hold ourselves accountable in the process during this time, and that this will not just be the beginning, but a continued dialogue as to how we ensure that riders and our employees are receiving what we've committed to and providing safe, equitable, reliable, and cost-effective public transportation for this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kibiti. Anyone else? Okay, hearing no others. Mr. Wiedefeld, your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. Before I do want to talk about the recent events and also obviously give an update on the safety service and fiscal management. But before that, I did want to recognize a very strong employee that is retiring. Today, I'd like to recognize a shining star who retired from Metro earlier this month. Because of the pandemic, we were unable to give Dolores Proctor a proper send-off. So it's only suitable and timely that we do so at this moment. Dolores is the personification of a talented and brilliant employee rising through the ranks. She began her career over 3 decades ago as a bus operator and was quickly promoted to the position of street supervisor. From there, she went on to serve as an assistant superintendent, assistant director, and service director. When named vice president of bus transportation in 2018, with oversight of more than 3,000 employees, Dolores broke the glass ceiling by becoming the first female to hold this position in the history of Metro. In addition to the many awards and honors she's received over the years, Dolores provided exceptional leadership during our Safe Track rail outages and successfully spearheaded several other milestone projects, including the opening of 2 state-of-the-art bus divisions, Shepherd Parkway and Andrews Federal Campus. We appreciate the tremendous impact and legacy she's left on this organization. Please join me in saluting Dolores on her stellar career and wishing her much happiness in retirement. And here's a photo of Dolores. We're really going to miss her. She was top-notch, just a top-notch individual. So thank you, Dolores. If I could now turn to the recent events, just speaking more broadly, the past few months have been a challenging time for the Metro family. We are feeling the heartache and fatigue of the pandemic, the economic anxiety it's caused, and now this renewed attention on the issues of long-standing racial injustice in this country and in this region. In a message sent last week, the executive leadership team of Metro and I expressed our thanks to each and every Metro employee who continue pushing through each day to serve the National Capital Region with dignity. The region needs us now more than ever to keep going even when we feel like it's too much. And as we move forward, we will continue to work to build an inclusive Metro community that supports our employees and the customers with fair and equitable policies. And I join with the board in that effort and look forward to work with the board as we pursue ways to improve the system from a racial discrimination perspective and a social inequity perspective. We turn to service. As peaceful demonstrations took place around the region last weekend, we were prepared for possible spike in ridership. For our Metro bus customers, we increased service by adding 136 trips on high demand routes. These additional trips will now stay in our service plan. On the rail side, the operations teams took steps to increase service and add capacity so that customers could maintain safe social distancing on the system. For example, on the recommendation of our pandemic task force, we reopened the first and last rail cars to passengers, a move that increased capacity by 33% overnight. As you know, we began isolating the first and last cars of every train in April at a time of great uncertainty about the virus, and as we worked to implement measures that would protect our employees and our customers. Since that time, we have learned much and taken many additional steps to protect our workforce, including requiring face coverings on our trains and buses and in stations. In the area of safety, our cleaning protocols have improved in recent weeks. We're now disinfecting stations, rail cars, and buses on a daily basis, and providing on-demand disinfection whenever there is a report of bodily fluids, a presumptive COVID-19 case. We're mopping, wiping down surfaces, and using electrostatic foggers for disinfection every day, with particular focus on high-touch areas and the operator compartments. In addition, we're evaluating new techniques for cleaning and cleaning products that could provide long-duration disinfection, even at high-touch areas. This is not an overnight change. Any new product will be tested and approved by our safety department before being deployed. These critical steps in the recovery plan, which Teresa will defer and the team will defer in our next agenda item. On the financial front, the dedicated revenue bonds. Moving on this month's financial update, last week, Metro sold its inaugural dedicated revenue bond, Series 2020A, through strong investor demand. We were able to achieve an all-in total interest cost of 2.7%, much lower than the board authorized rate, as well as lower than the rate that would have been achieved with the Federal Reserve's municipal liquidity facility. These bonds were rated AA by Standard & Poor's, AA by Fitch, and AA plus by Kroll, all higher than current gross revenue bond credit ratings, which will save over $7 million in interest costs to the region in the life of the bonds. I want to credit CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, Dennis Anasiki, and the entire financial team for their hard work to achieve this milestone, which enables us to advance critical safety and liability investments And I want to thank the board for giving us the ability to put this out to the market. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. Are there any questions or comments from Mr. Wiedefeld? Okay. If there are none, thank you. Jennifer? Okay. Mr. Wiedefeld, why don't you queue up the presentation again, as if we've started over here. We had to interrupt Teresa's presentation, so why don't we just start from the beginning? Thank you. Mr. Wiedefeld?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, the presentation that's up on the screen now is the COVID-19 recovery plan and budget update. That is not where we left off with Teresa. Do you want me to proceed?
I don't know if you could hear me. I said I think we should start from the beginning. She wasn't that far into it. And for people who may have joined, we seem to be having some more technical difficulties today again. So I want to just start from the beginning if we could. If you could queue it up and then turn it over to Teresa. Thank you.
Okay, so all right, very good. So from the COVID-19 update, again, let me just be clear. The slide you're seeing is the recovery plan, not the COVID-19 update from Teresa. You want Teresa to restart?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
All right, Teresa, could you please continue your presentation on just the basics of the COVID-19, where we are with that, please?
Absolutely, sir. Through current Metro's 12,300 employee workforce has a reported number of 157 confirmed cases of COVID-19. Of these 157 cases, 110 employees have recovered and returned to work, and 1 employee remains hospitalized at this time. The pandemic task force is continuing to meet twice weekly to review the progress of our mitigations and our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The numerous mitigations that have been put in place are continuously assessed for efficacy and reviewed against modifications to CDC guidelines. We are continuing our aggressive cleaning and disinfection program throughout our facilities, as the general manager has stated, and we will offer additional detail in the recovery program update. Lastly, we are continuing to communicate with both riders as well as our employees in multimodal fashions, including outreach emails, as well as town halls and Q&A sessions with employees. That concludes my update relative to COVID-19 status, and I will defer additional detail for the recovery planning.
Thank you, Ms. Empisato. Mr. General Manager, any final comments before we open it up to comments and questions?
No, sir.
All right. We'll go around the table. Ms. Gideby.
I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman.
Yes, thank you. A couple of observations. First, the low level of Metro employees that have come down with the virus, I think, is very impressive, and the task force and management should be commended for keeping it at those very low levels. I believe last time we looked, it was less than 1% or one part of 1%. But I do recall seeing a story that one employee had died from the virus, and I wonder if you can confirm that or whether that was a erroneous report.
All right, Teresa, can you give an update on that? Thank you.
Absolutely. I have no records of employees that have passed due to COVID-19 infections. I will double check that, but we don't have any information that would support that.
Okay, and so there's only, as far as you know, no fatalities and only one employee that's been hospitalized.
Correct.
Correct. And finally, could you just...
Mr. Goldman, I believe we've had additional people hospitalized over the course of this. Is that correct, Teresa? Currently, we have one that's still in the hospital.
That's correct.
Okay.
We've had approximately a dozen employees that required hospitalization for treatment. All have been released, with the exception of the one employee who remains hospitalized.
Okay. And finally, could you just give us the up-to-date numbers on the current ridership levels? I know generally the general manager's spoken in terms of rail off by 95% and bus off by 75%, but do you have in front of you the actual midweek current ridership levels for rail and bus?
Accepting the weekend ridership, which spiked, we are still reporting approximately a 93% reduction on our rail ridership and approximately a 67% reduction on our bus ridership. We will also speak in greater detail about the ridership trends in the recovery presentation, sir.
Right, but what are do you have in front of you the numbers of midweek riders for bus and rail that correspond to those percentages that you cited?
Approximately 47,000 rail trips and approximately 130 to 135,000 bus trips, sir.
Okay. Bus 135, rail 47, and that's most recently as of what period of time is that measuring? Is that measuring as of this week or as of the end of last week?
As of the end of last week, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Letourneau?
I don't have anything, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meridian?
No, I do not have any questions or comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Slater?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Mr. McMillan? Mr. Horner?
Sorry, this is Mr. McMillan. I was muted. Nothing from me.
Thank you. Mr. Horner?
I have none.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. Appreciate all your work you and your team are doing on our behalf, obviously. So, all right. Next on the agenda, we have a report by the Elections Committee. Now I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Horner, Chair of the Elections Committee, for his committee report.
Mr. Chair, I believe staff still wanted to speak to the recovery plan
Did we do that?
with their slides. Teresa had a COVID update, and then the staff wanted to talk about the recovery plan also.
All right, very good.
All right, Mr. Chairman, if I could just kick it off. This is Paul Wiedefeld. As of today, we're in the stabilization phase, as you know, preparing for the managed reentry phase of the program. The recovery plan timing has internal and external variables that we are tracking, driven by COVID transmission, impacting both the workforce availability, jurisdictional plans for schools, and employer return to work plans. Through both our surveys and employee page on the website, we believe our timing for the managed reentry window is likely mid-August to mid-September. Formerly, as you may recall, we were projecting an August to October window. We expect to be able to determine more specific plans by next month, again, as we gather more information, particularly on school openings and employer openings, and not only that they're opening, but how many people they anticipate coming to work, and just with their own social distancing protocols that they're going to put in place. I want to make sure to remind everyone in every phase, our priority remains protecting the health of our workforce and customers. I also want to thank Director Marushin and Mayor Bowser for their announcement yesterday that the Columbia Heights 14th Street corridor will have new bus and bike lanes soon. Bus lanes are not only provide more reliable service to customers, but allow us to cycle more buses through a route to expand capacity for bus riders very quickly. So now I'll turn it over to the entire team to walk in more detail on the recovery plan. I think, Tom, you're going to start, please.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Having some connection difficulty here too. John, could you cycle back to the previous slide with the goals? Thank you. So like last month, this will be a joint presentation. I'll begin and then turn it over to my colleagues to provide additional updates. Metro's recovery plan is designed to support the region's recovery and manage reentry while protecting the safety and well-being of Metro's employees and customers. The recovery plan is also designed to stay ahead of demand as much as possible during the region's gradual recovery. Next slide, please. Metro's plan calls for a phased recovery tied to external developments as we expect will bring more riders to the system. Each stage of the recovery plan addresses those twin priorities of protecting our workers and protecting our customers. We're preparing for multiple contingencies and a phased recovery with the approach grounded in flexible roadmap rather than a strict calendared timetable. The nature of our large operation provides or creates a challenge to quickly switching on higher levels of service. It takes time to develop new service plans, draft daily schedules, implement operator assignments, modify information systems, and give employers and riders notice of service changes. As Paul mentioned, Metro is currently in the stabilization phase of a recovery plan as regional stay-at-home orders have begun to ease and jurisdictions have begun moving into subsequent phases of their own recovery plan. We expect to be transitioning to the managed reentry plan and period when schools reopen in the fall and there's broader but still limited return to work in the region. Next slide, please. Metro is coordinating with federal, state, and local officials, as well as public health experts, and we're actively sharing information with other transit agencies across the country and around the world. The jurisdictions in the region are moving forward with phased reopening plans. These early recovery phases are incremental. The jurisdictions are generally encouraging residents and businesses to stay safe, maintain social distancing, continue careful cleaning and disinfecting, wearing facial coverings, and continuing to limit non-essential travel. Many businesses remain closed or only partially open, and many employers in the region, including the federal government, continue to maximize or to use maximum flexibility telework. Now, turn the presentation over to our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa, for the next stage of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. As stated in prior updates, Metro's pandemic plan focuses on protecting our employees at work following CDC guidelines to reduce exposure risk. Metro has conducted and continues to conduct in-depth analyses to identify and reduce risk through the application of the hierarchy of controls. We've implemented a series of risk mitigations that include engineering and administrative controls, as well as personal protective equipment and the use of cloth facial coverings throughout the system. Prior updates have detailed the mitigations which are being continuously monitored for improvements by the Pandemic Task Force. As new evidence emerges and new data is being assimilated, mitigations are reviewed in alignment with CDC guidance and are updated or modified. These mitigations include remote work where feasible. Metro support staff are currently working remotely. So, through modified work practices, including partitioning of workspaces to create physical separation, intense cleaning, disinfection, and ventilation efforts, personal protective equipment, and hand hygiene emphasis throughout the workforce. Next slide, please. As stated earlier, throughout Metro's 12,300 employee workforce, there are 157 confirmed cases per day. This represents a case rate of 12.7 per 1,000. Current percentage of confirmed cases of the workforce represents a fraction of a percent. 110 of those employees have recovered and returned to work, with one remaining hospitalized at this time. I do have follow-up information with regard to Member Goldman's question about the employee, the report of an employee who expired from COVID-19. Media had reported that employee was a retired bus operator. So we grieve along with their loved ones for that loss. We have not had any reported fatalities amongst the currently active Metro workforce. There are over 71,000 confirmed cases in the National Capital Region. Models predict continued increases in infections over the next 21 days. An average of 400 Metro employees are in quarantine at any given time. In accordance with our pandemic plan and the CDC guidance, employees are quarantined for a period of 14 days when it has been determined that they have had close contact with an individual who has a positive COVID-19 case, regardless of whether or not the potential exposure took place in the workplace. I'd like to spend some time reviewing the table on the right-hand side of this slide. This table depicts the COVID-19 case rates per compact jurisdiction, alongside the percentage of the Metro workforce that resides in these jurisdictions. As illustrated by the chart, we proudly serve the communities in which we live. Metro's case rates for employees correlate strongly with the case rates for the jurisdiction. In monitoring the progression of the case rates, we've noted increasing numbers of employee quarantines, along with positive cases, in tandem with increasing case rates within the community, as would be expected with regard to community transmission. As you can see, the vast majority of our workforce resides in 4 areas, with over half of our workforce residing in the District of Columbia and Prince George's County, Maryland. It is critical for Metro to continue to track the progression of positive cases in the compact jurisdictions, as the health and availability of our workforce will reflect the communities in which we serve and reside. As my colleagues mentioned, we are continuing our coordination with the jurisdictions to ensure that our progress through the phases of recovery is aligned to meet the needs of the region while continuing to protect the health and safety of our workforce. This concludes my update, and I'd like to pass the presentation to my colleague, Lynn Bowersox, to discuss our customer outreach efforts.
Thank you, Teresa. If we can go to the next slide, please. Metro has continued to survey our customers to stay synced up with their perceptions and their behavior. And as you can see in this slide, the differences between May and April are subtle. Ridership was largely unchanged among rail customers and people who ride both rail and bus. However, the trips to see friends or family doubled from, more than doubled actually, from 9 to 23%. So as the weather improved and people got more comfortable with the safety protocols, they left home to see family. As you can also see, the travel to work stayed largely unchanged, and most people who did have to travel outside of their home to get to a workplace chose to drive. 1 in 5 of telecommuting customers said that they have received some sort of return to work announcements, but only 10% mentioned a date earlier than August. 1 in 4 of our customers on the rail side and rail and bus side are aware of Metro's recovery plan, and an overwhelming majority favor the plan at this time. We are increasing awareness through communications this month and next month, with the expectation of trying to get folks to understand the preparations for and timing around the managed reentry plan. Next slide. On the bus side, we collect bus data differently. We mailed to 30,000 homes a request to take a brief survey that you can take by phone on your phone. And we did get a significant sample, a representative sample of bus customers. And in order to conclude this information, Unlike rail, where fewer than 20% of our rail customers are still riding, half of our bus customers are still riding bus. And they are riding 2 to 3 times a week, not only to make essential journey to work trips, but also to get groceries, to get their medication, as well as to make medical appointments. When we ask our customers for their household incomes and to identify themselves, you'll see here that the customers who are still riding with us during the pandemic are even more likely to self-report that they're in lower income households and that they are African American. 7 in 10 people who rode Metrobus in both April and May believe that we're doing what we can to minimize the spread of COVID-19. And of course, the last bullet suggests that we continue to get communications out through every channel targeted to every demographic that's represented in our customer base so that they can get better information about our plans. Next slide. Our survey also includes our Smart Benefits employers. Our Smart Benefits employers pretty evenly responded to the survey between smaller businesses with fewer than 100 employees, fewer than 500 employees, and more than 500 employees. They represent both the government and private sectors. And most are saying they do not have a finalized return to work plan yet. They also say that the primary driver of their plans is the time and resources needed to make their workplaces safe for their employees, to provide socially distant workspaces. We have started hearing just this week from some of the larger government agencies that we work with through Smart Benefits, such as USDOT and DOD, about the possibility of phased return to work beginning in July, but it's a very small percentage of their workforce, and they will be providing free parking where they have that available for folks in order to allay any concerns they may have about their health and safety. In the next slide, you'll see that we are continuing employer outreach through multiple opportunities. We're participating in the DMV COVID-19 Strategic Renewal Task Force, which is really one of the largest and sort of the who's who of commercial and community organizations who have banded together to try to help reopen the region and recover in a safe way. And so, excuse me, Wmata participates on that steering group, and you'll see a list of just a few of some of the other groups that we're regularly meeting and collaborating with to make sure that our recovery plan is aligned with their needs and that they understand the information. We really appreciate Nova Chamber of Commerce. That's why their logo is here, because they promoted our employer survey and the Wmata.com website data collection to their membership on their e-newsletter recently. That are doing that. You can advance the slide, please. That website, Wmata.com/return to work, is collecting information. We're actually, since we sent this out to you on Monday, I think we're over 50 now businesses that have provided input. Of these, fewer than 20% expect a return to any workplace before August. We've also talked this week with OMB and OPM. Of course, they remain in a maximum telework status, but again, they're starting to think and talk about the possibility of phased service return, maybe with some priority folks coming back in the July-August timeframe. And all of our employers, whether they're government, private sector, larger employers, or smaller employers, are telling us that their return to work plans, as they're developing them, are phased and include either staggered hours or staggered days for their employees. And importantly, that they anticipate extending telework for some period of time. I think that what we've learned from employers and customers confirms our timing for the managed reentry phase of the recovery. Laid out up front, such as the return of schools and things like that, as well as the tracking of COVID cases. Should there be a spike, that could influence the timing. But as we sit here today, we are on track with many of the large institutions in terms of where we are in our phased recovery. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Glenn. Good morning. As mentioned before by the GM, Teresa and Lynn, and I know we've mentioned it before with other presentations that we have given the board, cleaning is really important and it's on the mind of our customers. And it's they want us to see do as much cleaning as possible so that they will feel safe when they come back to our system. So we are daily disinfecting our buses, our rail vehicles, our stations, and our facilities. And we're focusing on the high touch areas that are common surfaces that most people will touch as they enter our system or use our vehicles. We are also performing on a daily basis electrostatic fogger testing, cleaning, I should say, and that is ongoing. We're also doing on-demand disinfecting when we have a COVID-19 case that's either presumptive or is positive. And that is done by third-party contractors that we have hired to do so, and that is ongoing as well. We also have a team that is also investigating what we're learning in the industry, long duration disinfecting chemical. And we are going through the procedure, working with our safety department to ensure that anything that we bring onto the system is not only approved by them, but also is EPA certified. In regards to the supply chain, if we went back months ago, I would say globally the supply chain was broken. But at this point right now, we are doing very well when it comes to acquiring personal protective equipment like masks and hand sanitizer. It took a while, but right now we have a good stock in hand and we are set for many months. And finally, when it comes to experiencing some delays when it comes to parts delivery, we have seen that on occasion, but we have nothing right now that would be considered a red flag when it comes to preventive maintenance or our inspection process. So we're doing well there. Next slide. Okay. In terms of service planning, what we mentioned before in other presentations is we want to be one step ahead of ridership demand. And that's really important. So, for instance, this past weekend, as the GM had mentioned before, we believed there was going to be a large increase in ridership on Saturday. We did see an increase compared to other Saturdays that we've had in the last few months. This past Saturday, we had almost 61,000 riders on rail alone. So that is the reason why we opened up the first 88 rail cars to give us that extra 33% capacity that we needed, and we're going to leave them open now so that we can allow our customers to continue to social distancing when it comes to using our system. Again, right now we are in the stabilization phase in rail and currently on bus. The bus operators are picking with the new stabilization pick and schedule that we're trying to get in effect. We hope by the end of this month that stabilization pick on the bus side will be in effect. And again, we not only just encourage, but we are just saying we're mandating that face coverings are required for our customers and our employees if we're using the system. And I can tell you over this past weekend on Saturday, myself and the chief were out visiting some of the stations, visiting some of the police officers and our employees. And I can tell you, definitely on rail, we're seeing high compliance from our customers when it comes to wearing some form of face coverings. So what's next for us? Again, we want to stay ahead of any kind of demand when it comes to ridership. So we are currently right now, my rail and my bus planning teams are working on new service patterns that will get us into what we're calling the managed reentry phase, which we believe will start at the fall of 2020. We anticipate that will give us about 70 to 80% of normal service. And so we think we will have plenty of service out there for the demand that will take place, and that will take us not only through the fall, but most likely the winter of 2020. And we hope, again, that this new schedule will go into effect towards the end of the summer before we see schools open and we see more loosening of the restrictions from the jurisdictions. And finally, we believe we're still on target for the recovery phase, which is we believe will be sometime in the spring of 2021. As long as we don't see in the region a second wave of COVID coming back, we believe the recovery phase will start around then. And now I would like to turn the presentation over to Laura Mason.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning. This is Dennis Anosike, CFO. As we've seen in recent months, ridership was significantly down in April, being down 94% on Metro Rail, 84% on Metro Bus, and 75% on Metro Access compared to same period last year. That low ridership, along with the Metro Bus fare waiver, which is associated with the rear door boarding policy to protect bus operators and passengers, led to a $65.4 million drop in operating revenues for the month. Expenses, on the other hand, remained relatively on budget, with some savings in the budget coming from energy, utilities, and other supplies. However, as I've stated to the board in the last couple of months, Metro's FY 2020 operating budget remains on track for year-end balance using the prior budget savings that we discussed with the board, as well as the CARES Act funding. And looking forward to FY 2021, we believe at this point that the proposed management actions, which the board approved last month, along with the hiring actions that the management expects to take, and the remaining CARES funding, are still expected at this time to enable Metro to reduce operating subsidy requests by $135 million and still balance Metro's FY 2021 operating budget. I will now transfer it back to Tom Webster.
Thank you, Dennis. On the capital budget side, Metro invested approximately $1.5 billion through May, the 11th month of fiscal year 2020, through our capital budget. Federal guidance and regional stay-at-home policies included mass transit and construction as essential, and Metro's projects have been authorized to continue working, though many have been impacted in various ways by the pandemic. Metro has been working with our contractors to revise construction protocols to incorporate CDC guidance for hand and tool washing, social distancing, and facial coverings and PPE. While some capital projects are delayed due to COVID-19 impacts, Metro is accelerating other safety and state of good repair work. The net result that the overall FY20 capital budget performance remains on target, and no board action on the FY20 capital budget is needed at this time. We will begin to provide the board with updates on the FY21 capital budget in future briefings. I'll now turn it over to Laura Mason for updates on capital delivery.
Thank you, Tom. Next slide, please. So as discussed briefly in the Finance and Capital Committee, I did want to touch on an update for the platform Phase 2 project, our progress to date. We currently have, as of May 31st, our contractor has 547 people working on this project, and work is progressing well. With respect to COVID-19, Kiewit has recorded 6 confirmed cases along with 10 presumed positive, and have maintained zero cases hospitalized. They have had to quarantine additional 25 people. Of the 41 people impacted, 34 have returned to work. So they've been able to manage within their CDC guidance to keep their workforce safe. With respect to the progress itself, we are well ahead of where we were at this point last year. The photos on the right-hand side of the screen show you where we were before this week and at the end of the first week of the outage. And you can see at Vienna Station that all of the platform edges have been demolished and all of the platform tile has been removed, as well as the skylight work has begun on the station itself. In terms of all 4 stations, At all 4 of them, we are 100% complete with platform edge demolition and platform tile and topping slab removal. And we're making excellent progress with the ceiling panels, skylights, and our fire alarm conduit installation. With this progress, we are tracking well to reopen by Labor Day weekend. Next slide. Can we go to the next slide for the June track work plan? Perhaps we're having a technical difficulties with the slides again.
That is correct, Laura. We are having a technical issue. So if you want to just speak to the rest of your slides, we'll do our best, but we're having another technical issue. Apologies.
That's okay. For those of you listening, when you do see the slides, there is a lot of content on them. I will go over it, but definitely encourage everyone to reference the slides or go to wmata.com for the details of the outages. What I'd like to cover next is the continuation of the localized shutdowns we discussed last month. This is a tool for us to continue to progress our state of good repair capital work outside the West of Boston shutdown, because due to COVID, we've had impacts in terms of the operational resources available to support our capital program. Doing these localized shutdowns allows us to reduce our burden on operations while still maintaining progress on key state of good repair initiatives. For June, our track work plan began this past Monday, June 8th through the 13th. We have closed the Yellow Line Bridge between L'Enfant Plaza and Pentagon. So there's no Yellow Line service north of National Airport. Work got off to a very good start on Monday and will continue over the next 2 weeks. Beginning this coming Sunday, June 14th through the 20th, the work zone will expand to include L'Enfant Plaza to Anacostia and Pentagon, including the closure of Navy Yard and waterfront stations. And there will continue to be no Yellow Line service north of National Airport. June 21st to the 27th, the work zone shifts to become L'Enfant Plaza to Shaw Howard and Pentagon, and the closed stations will be Archives, the lower level of Gallery Place Chinatown, and Mount Vernon Convention Center. And again, no Yellow Line service north of National Airport. Finally, in June 28th to July 2nd, we will close between Mount Vernon and U Street, closing Shaw Howard Station. In all cases, we are maintaining the same rail service in the stations not affected by the closure. Any stations that are closed will have a bus bridge provided to connect them across the closure. In July, we are now sharing our track work plan of the localized shutdowns for the month of July. Following the 4th of July holiday, we will resume these shutdowns on July 6th to the 18th with a closure between U Street and Fort Totten stations on the green and yellow lines, closing Columbia Heights and Georgia Avenue stations. July 19th to July 25th will be a closure on the red line between Judiciary Square to Rhode Island, closing Union Station and Noma Station. And finally, our last event for July will be July 26th to August 1st, a closure between Fort Totten and Silver Spring on the red line, closing the Tacoma Station. We have the slides. If we could go up to the last slide. See, you're almost there, so I'll pause for a moment. Perhaps not. So I'd like to close the recovery plan update on behalf of my colleagues with a 90-day look ahead of where we see the recovery plan going and how it is going to evolve this summer. Now in the month of June, as we've already heard from my colleagues, we are reopening the 1st and 8th rail cars within the rail system. We are starting the bus stabilization service. This month in June, we will also finalize our own office reentry plan, as well as the managed reentry service levels that we expect to go into effect in mid-August to mid-September. Next month in July, we'll be working to evolve our workforce protection measures in anticipation of the managed reentry service and how to continue to protect our employees while we increase service. We will look at options for COVID-19 screening for our workforce and look forward to our next board briefing, updating you on these topics on July 9th. Beyond July, what we're looking at for August is when we would implement the managed reentry service picks for bus and rail. And in September, early September, complete the Platform 2 project and end the west of Ballston shutdown. And that is the end of our recovery plan update presentation. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. We'll go around the table like we normally do here. Ms. Gideby, any questions or comments for any of the staff?
Yes, thank you for your continued leadership in giving us an update of the COVID-19 plan and also for the recovery reopening. My question actually relates to I have a couple of questions. One of them is related to the survey, particularly the bus one. You said 3,500 surveys were mailed. How many actually came back that we're using? Actually, this is for all of them. What was the percentage of the response rate?
So it was actually 30,000 mailed
30,000
to bus customers. Smart Trip, so it's a little different for rail and bus versus bus. So as you know, when we poll the rail customers, we're able to use the Smart Trip accounts that people register online. We find that that does not adequately represent bus-only customers. So we supplement the survey results by doing that 30,000 house mailing to get more input from bus-only customers. So I can get for you as a follow-up, the number of rail and bus that responded. But the survey representation is such that the response rate is within a plus or minus margin of about 5 points. And so what we can say in terms of statistical representation and significance here is that there's no close calls here. The majorities are large enough that even with that 5-point variation, we're sure that this is directionally significant and instructive and actionable information back from customers.
Okay, I think I was more so just wanting to, what I'm hearing is that you're saying that you'll get back to me on what the actual of the 30,000, are we talking 10 people responded? That's what I'm just trying to understand in terms of the actual people who responded to the survey.
Right, typically those survey responses would be between 1% and 2%.
Okay. And then just going to the, thank you, I'll leave the survey pieces until you have the clear numbers. For the high touch areas, can you explain a little bit more? I think that was Joe. When you were talking about the high touch areas in which we were doing cleaning, is the thought process to, especially for bus, I think one of the things that we've been seeing is that there would be some sort of number of like how many times this bus has been cleaned or something like that that could allow for the public to be able to see. Is there any type of, if you are getting on the bus, for a bus rider to fully understand kind of what has been done to date? I think one of the things that came from the survey is essentially only 25%, so that means 75% of the folks don't actually know what our plans are. So I'm just thinking about other ways in which we may need to be amplifying all that we're doing.
Yes, and so we'll be putting information on the system about what we're doing, as well as through our direct channels to customers, which include everything from our Metro alerts to emails to digital communications to their Facebook accounts, that kind of thing.
Well, I guess that's what we've been doing, but we only have 25% of folks who actually know what's happening. So that means that what we're doing may not be sufficient. Are we thinking about other ways for us to really get to people? And I think particularly because we're seeing that like 50% of the folks are still riding bus, are we going to put something physically on the bus or put it where people are actually, okay.
Yes, we are. And frankly, we haven't actually exploited all of those channels yet. We've generated a lot of news media coverage about our plan, but we have not had the placements in all of those channels yet that we will. beginning this month. So I think I'm confident that number will go up. And, you know, the issue is when you only have a small percentage of your ridership actually on the system, we typically use those communications, right, to get to most of them. And they always point to that as the most reliable way. But when they're not on the system, we have to reach beyond that.
That's right. No problem. Thank you. I just have one final question, and it's with the capital improvement. For future updates, can we just given the economic reality of what is happening within our region and just nationally, it would be good for us in future updates if you could also just for contracts or work projects that are happening, just the workforce, who's benefiting from it, small businesses that we are doing with the primes, just to be able to understand that like we are spending a lot of money, and especially even with some of the platform updates that are happening as well. It's an opportunity for those who are in this region to be able to also be able to work here. And so to the extent that we can speak to the numbers and the diversification of who's benefiting from the money that we're spending, that would be helpful as well. Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Goldman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got another question or two for Lynn Bowersox on the survey. Did this survey collect demographic and race and ethnicity information on our current bus and rail riders?
It does, and it aligns with the last full passenger studies that we did, which are now dated about 2 years ago. And so every time we field a survey, whether it's customer satisfaction or pandemic behavior, we do ask people for household income, race, ethnicity, and so on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, could you provide that information precisely as to what was revealed by the survey for both bus and rail ridership? And did it also, did the survey also ask questions as to income bands, so one could figure out people that are poverty or above poverty line, or upper level income bands? Was that information also collected?
It was, and we used the federal standards for poverty and income levels. And so you will see customers who register their household income at less than 30,000, the whole way up to above 150,000.
Okay, yeah, it'd be very helpful if you could distribute that so we have a better sense of who's actually our bus and rail ridership, at least at this particular time, looking towards the fall as well. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, Mr. Letourneau?
So just understanding workforce availability a little bit, as we increase our the number of routes that we're providing, particularly on the bus side, are we going to have sufficient workforce availability to do that without impacting any other routes? You know, in other words, would we have to reduce somewhere in order to provide additional service somewhere else?
This is Joe. I guess I could take that question. We are basing our managed reentry schedules on the bus side with the goal of having about 80% of the workforce healthy. We realize that we will always have sick. We will have people that will still either contact COVID in the fall or possibly be quarantined because of someone that they came into contact with. So we are basing those schedules around an 80% of the workforce availability. With that said, we believe that schedule, things like express buses and things like that, we will probably not have. We will probably have more local service, and so it will be a different type of bus schedule compared to what we were in our pre-COVID days.
Okay. Are there any routes currently running, though, that we may not be able to continue running in order to staff improvements next month or later this month?
Okay. The stabilization pick that's going to be going into effect, we're basically going to be running the same route we're running now. The managed reentry, which is going to be towards the end of the summer, we're working on that right now, so I don't have all the details, but I can get that to you in the next few weeks.
Okay. Yeah, one request I'll just have is I get concerns and questions from the jurisdiction anytime there are changes to bus schedules or bus availability or so on. Obviously, we're in a totally unprecedented time right now, but as much communication as we can have in advance of some of those things, particularly if there's going to be what would be perceived as a sort of reduction in service, would be very helpful. So I would appreciate that. Otherwise, this was a really good, really comprehensive presentation. I appreciate all the outreach that's being done, particularly, to the business community to understand what's happening with them and making sure that we're responding as we can and be ready when the workforce actually is coming back. And I know that we're committed to continuing to be transparent as we can about that and everything that we're doing. So I think these type of presentations are really important. So thank you to all the staff that's working on that.
Thanks, Matt. Mr. Meridian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to extend my thanks to the staff on the jurisdictional coordination around the capital improvement plan. I know how difficult it is to coordinate and communicate around those types of issues, and we appreciate the advanced heads up and the collaboration there.
Thank you. And before I call the next person, if we could, we have a lot of people on the line. When you're not speaking, if you could put yourself on mute, it would help. Thank you. Secretary Slater?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of my questions have really been answered by the other board members' questions. I think I was more inclined to have a good understanding of how we were kind of communicating some of the practices, those types of things, and it was answered satisfactorily. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Horner?
I have no question.
Thank you. Mr. McMillan?
Yes, regarding the Yellow Line Bridge closure, I note this is the second multi-week closure of that bridge over the past couple of years here. I wonder if someone could briefly characterize the work that was done on the last big shutdown, the current one, and then give some assessment of whether this is a regular thing or these are two opportunities to make some large, long overdue repairs, or is this something we're going to see again before too much longer?
Okay, the current work, this is Joe Leader. The current work that's going on is predominantly CWR installation as well as grout pads. It's mostly coming out of the DC side of the portal. There was some grout work that was done before, some ballast replacement in prior shutdowns, but there was some additional grout work that needed to be done, and that is what's being scheduled right now, along with other work that's that we could fit in there. But the predominant work is grout pad and CWR installation.
Mr. McMillan, I can add to that for this week, we have started with the grout pad work, and that is similar to what was done during the 2-week closure. That was 2 years ago in 2018. I can follow up with you and give you a more detailed look at the Yellow Line Bridge as a whole and the total quantity of grout pads we needed to replace, of rail that needed to be replaced, and of other work that is coming up. In addition, during this closure of the bridge, we are also doing a lot of work within the tunnel and particularly addressing the radio project in its approach to LaFont Plaza, as that's one of our remaining segments to be completed.
Thanks. I would appreciate a little more detail. It does sound like a lot of the things being done now are similar to what was done 2 years ago, and I guess I'm trying to get a comfort level on whether we're catching up, ever catching up, or if this is just an old asset that's going to need this type of attention on a regular basis. Thank you.
Okay. Any final comments or questions from folks? All right. Thank you, Laura and Tom, Dennis, everyone, Teresa, Lynn. Appreciate that report and look forward to your future reports as well. Okay, next, go back to the agenda here. Okay, now we'll move to the Elections Committee. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Horner, Chair of the Elections Committee, for his committee report. Mr. Horner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The following item was referred to the board at this morning's Elections Committee. 2020-2021 board officer nominations. The committee voted to nominate Paul Smedberg as the board chair, Stephanie Gideby as the first vice chair, and Michael Goldman as the second vice chair. Mr. Chairman, I move approval of this slate of officers.
Thank you, Mr. Horner. We have a motion by Mr. Horner. Is there a second?
I'll second Secretary Slater.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If there is none, we'll call the roll. Ms. Gideby?
Aye.
Mr. Goldman?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Mr. Marushian?
Aye.
Secretary Slater?
Aye.
Mr. McMillan?
Aye.
And Mr. Horner?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Motion passes. We have two consent items on the board's consent calendar today. I'd like to move approval of the following. Acquisition of housing credits. Staff requests board approval to acquire housing credits valued at over $1 million for the Jackson Graham building site in furtherance of a joint development agreement with Square 487 Associates. And second, a fiscal year 2021 Virginia PREA funding agreement. Staff requests board approval to negotiate and execute the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act funding agreement between Metro and the Virginia Department of Rail Public Transportation for fiscal year 2021. This agreement will provide $50 million in PREA funding that is already included in the fiscal year 2021 capital budget. I move approval. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Gideby. Any questions or comments? If not, Ms. Austin, please administer the vote.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Director Horner?
Going to abstain.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
And Director McMillan?
Aye.
Thank you. These items, the motion passes.
Thank you. Now we'll move to our final item, reports by the jurisdiction. Mr. Letourneau, I know I'm listed here, but anything do you think we need to highlight for NVTC?
No, nothing's coming to mind, Chairman. That's essential.
I think we're good. I don't know if you wanted any with the silver line. Okay, Ms. Gideby for the district.
No comments at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Goldman, WSTC.
Yes, thank you. Announce that the WSTC, Washington Suburban Transit Commission, will hold its biannual meeting virtually on June 26th between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. The public is invited to join in. There will be an ad in the Washington Post, which will provide details shortly on how to register and how to participate and sign in. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Pat Pesher, the staff at the Washington Suburban Transit Commission, for more information. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing a number of you virtually on the 26th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Horner, anything from the federal government?
There's nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with no further business to come before the board, we stand adjourned. We will reconvene our earlier executive session. Just a reminder, there are no additional Metro board activities this month. So we'll see you all in July. Thank you very much. For the board, we'll reconvene in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.